Jackie Robinson changed baseball. He changed America. He started the civil rights movement. He ended 60 years of exclusion. But why Jackie? I'm Bob Kendrick, president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City. And this is Black Diamonds, the stories of Negro Leagues baseball.
Hey, man, that's the hottest podcast on Sirius XM right now, ladies and gentlemen. Come on, man. I got to give it to this guy. He was named Citizen of the Year by the Omicron chapter of the Omega Psi-Phi fraternity. In 2006, the Greater Kansas City Black Chamber of Commerce awarded him the Mary Lona Diversity Award. He was inducted into the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame in 2014. I like to call him a friend, Heather B, because when I went out to D.C., we hung out, and I walked away smarter than I was when I entered D.C. Welcome him on the show, man. My good friend, the one and only Bob Kendrick is here. Bob!
Hey,
what
Bob!
up? Hey, what's up, Sway, man? It's so good to catch up again. Thank you guys for having me.
Man.
Welcome, Bob.
Come on, man. I always talk about, I met some good friends from that time I went out there to D.C. and hung out with you. I actually met some people I stayed in contact with since then, and we sat and had a wonderful conversation about the Negro League and its prominence and all the accolades and all the things, its importance. And now you got a podcast called Black Diamonds. It's about the history of the Negro League baseball, man. Give Bob Kendrick a round of applause, man. I love it, man.
Amazing.
It's amazing. Tell me about the podcast. How did this happen?
Man, I tell you, the guys over at Sirius reached out to me. They said, well, Bob, we think you're a pretty good storyteller. We would love to work with you and partner with the museum on a podcast to tell some of these really untold stories as it relates to the Negro Leagues, basically similar to what you and I did in D.C., where we just kind of talked and told these stories. And you know, the last thing that I thought about ever doing was my own podcast. Now, I'd interviewed on virtually everybody else's podcast, but I never thought about actually hosting one myself, and they made a compelling case for why we should do this, and we're thrilled to be able to have launched this podcast in April, and, you know, I am pleasantly surprised at how well it is doing. And we're just having a good time, Sway, you know, telling stories, man, and talking to folks and trying to find ways to make a contemporary connection to this history. And so people are responding quite well to this.
How have you, in what ways have you made that contemporary connection with this history? What has been effective?
Well, I honestly, I think the stories themselves, because the Negro Leagues were just so different than Major League Baseball. It was so far ahead of Major League Baseball, the way they played the game, their approach, mindset, everything was just so different. So I think it speaks to a modern audience because there was a little bit of rebel in these players. They were activists before we knew anything about sports activism. And so I think this mindset that they carried, you know, you can't stop me from playing this game. I'll show you. And I think that speaks to people, but folks just didn't know this story. And so now for me, the contemporary aspect of it really ties to, particularly when I speak with the young athletes who are playing this game today and then making that connection to them. I'll give you a great example. We had members of what we call the Black Aces, and these are African-American pitchers to win 20 games or more in a season in Major League Baseball history, only 15 of them to ever do that. Well, we had 3 of them on one of our podcasts, and we talked to CeCe Sabathia and to David Price and the great Dave Stewart. And we talked about the great pitchers of the Negro Leagues who could have been 20-game winners had they been given the opportunity, and gave basically a history lesson about these legendary players who, I have no doubt, they would have dominated at the Major League level just like they dominated at the Negro League level.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that, man. When I think about the Negro League, I think about, like, even coming to talk with you, you know, and I was doing my research. I know that, you know, they say it started around the 1920s, right? Am I mistaken?
Yes.
About 19.
No, you're right.
Okay. But prior to that, you know, baseball had organized itself in the 1800s. What were happening with these black athletes then, these baseball players? What were they doing?
Yeah, we have a long love affair with this game. We've been playing this game for a long time. We've been playing this game, as you mentioned, into the late 1800s. There's even evidence of us having played as slaves or as enslaved people. And so we've always played a role in this game. And so, but it was just so haphazard, Sway. Guys were jumping from team to team. It was tough to get games. Booking agents were taking all the money. And really, it was through the urgence of the black press that pushed for a more formalized structure. And that's what Rube Foster was able to give it in 1920 in a meeting that took place right around the corner from where the museum currently operates, literally a stone's throw from my office, as we're having this conversation today. And Rube Foster gave it what it needed, and that was that organized presence. And after that, man, black baseball just took off.
Wow, man. We got Bob Kendrick, man. Give him a round of applause. When I say his name, give this man a round of applause. Black Diamonds is the new podcast on Sirius XM on all our platforms. Bizzle, you want to jump in there?
I do, Mr. Kendrick. Thank you for calling the show. I wanted to just know personally for you, what made you fall in love with baseball? Because I grew up, watching sports with my dad and my brothers, but it was always, football or basketball. But they just didn't have that love for baseball. I was wondering what attracted baseballs to you.
It started for me when I was a kid. I'm the youngest of six boys, and my older brothers all loved the game. My father loved the game. I was introduced to the game through him and through my brothers, and taught myself how to read a box score out of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution as a kid growing up in small-town Georgia, Crawfordville, Georgia, about 80 miles east of Atlanta. And Henry Aaron was my all-time favorite baseball player, my childhood idol, as a matter of fact. And so, we played every sport that was in season, but my town was too small to field a high school baseball team. So I ended up playing small college basketball, which got me to the Midwest. But I've been a baseball fan since I can remember, and so I chased the basketball from Crawfordville, Georgia, to the Kansas City area, and now I make my living in baseball, but albeit baseball history. But, you just wanted to emulate your heroes, and Henry Aaron was my hero. And, even as we share this conversation today, there's a piece of my heart that's missing with his passing in January of this year. He meant that much to me and the Negro Leagues Museum family as he did to the baseball world. And so, but, we prided ourselves and just wanted to play everything. And back then we played what we call hardball. And so they didn't really call it baseball. They got a hardball game going on at the park today, and the local town teams would come in and play the little town team, and everybody would go out and watch the game, and you just wanted to emulate that. You wanted to be a part of that. And so the game grew on me, and so even though I didn't get a chance to play it in an organized capacity, I've always been a baseball fan.
Hardball, huh? All right. Tracy, you ever play hardball? Never
I
played
won't
that,
be
Tracy?
tempted to make any inappropriate jokes with my man Bob here. Bob, I'm wondering, what was that first note in history when you're doing your research on baseball history? What was that first story you came across that made you say, oh my gosh, I never knew about this, and blew your mind?
It was the entire history. It really was. Because here I am now. I considered myself to be a baseball fan. And then I quickly, as I got introduced to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, believe it or not, y'all, as a volunteer way back in 1993. And I quickly realized I didn't know a doggone thing about this game because there was this entire chapter of baseball and Americana that I had no idea about. Mm-hmm. And I literally became engrossed in it. I wanted to learn as much as I could, and I didn't want to keep it to myself. I wanted everybody to feel the same way I felt about it. And then you started to meet the players. You started to meet these amazing athletes who, their spirits, I think endeared me even more. I fell even deeper in love with the story after meeting them because none of them, to a player that I ever met, not one of them ever harbored any bitterness or expressed any ill will toward anyone who may have attempted to have perpetrated something against them as they were playing or trying to play baseball in this country. And I think every one of us would have said, had they been bitter, that they had every right to be bitter. But not one of them ever harbored any bitterness. You know why? Because you could not convince them that they weren't playing the best baseball that was being played in this country. Now, the world thought the best baseball was being played in the major leagues. They never believed that. They knew how good they were. They knew how good their league was. And you know what? The major leaguers knew how good they were. So they were very self-assured about their ability to play this game. Now, did they like the things that happened to them as they traveled the highways and byways of this country? Of course not. But they would never allow that to harden their hearts with hate. And I think that's why so many of them live such long, fulfilled lives. Because as my friend, the late, great Buck O'Neill would tell you, hate eats you up on the inside. Man, hate takes you out of here. It takes a lot of energy to hate another human being, particularly when you don't even know them. And so they just never would succumb to that. And I just found that spirit to be even more endearing. And like I said, I fell even deeper in love with the story. But really every aspect of the story was like, oh, man, I didn't know that. You know, I knew the names Satchel Paige and Cool Papa Bell and Josh Gibson because those are transcending names. Most baseball fans have at least heard those names. Even if you don't know just how great they really were, you probably heard those names somewhere in conversation. But, guys, I had no idea about the breadth, the scope, the magnitude that this history represented both on and off the field. So I think virtually every aspect of this story left me with that, oh, I didn't know that. And I think I see that every day when people walk through the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. It is an awakening. It is an eye-opening experience for virtually every one of our visitors who come to see us.
Go ahead, Sway. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Heather.
Mr. Kendricks, I have a question because you mentioned traveling in this country, but, you know, being blessed enough to travel, you know, abroad and travel to other places, I see that a lot of the Hispanic community, if you will, Latina community, baseball is huge. If you go to DR, you go to different places. I mean, there are baseball fields everywhere.
Right.
And here in the States, I see a few. I don't see a lot of young black boys playing baseball. Culturally, do you think something happened with us in terms of baseball versus, you know, the Hispanic community? Why you see you so much more on the Hispanic side than young black kids playing baseball? Just for me, and maybe I'm thinking small-minded, but
no.
Okay.
No. You're absolutely right. You know, there became a detachment with this game and the black community at some point in time, whereas we still see that baseball is held in high regard in those Spanish-speaking countries. And really the coincidence here is that when Negro League players who were really the first Americans to play in many Spanish-speaking countries, when we went there, we were revered. We were staying in the finest hotels, eating in the finest restaurant that those countries had to offer, and we taught that brand of baseball that you still see that Spanish-speaking athlete bring with them to the major leagues today. They bring a little flavor to the game because they still play the game the way that we introduced it to them when we came there. Now, they were playing great baseball all the time, but they play with a flair. And when the Negro League players went to those places that you mentioned, the Dominican Republic, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Venezuela, all those places, we were absolutely adored and emulated. One of my favorite stories was told to me by Roberto Clemente Jr., whose father, the great Roberto Clemente, one of the greatest baseball players of all time, his idol was the great Monty Irvin. Monty Irvin was a superstar player in the Negro Leagues for the Newark Eagles. But when Monty went down to Puerto Rico, a young Roberto Clemente fell in love with Monty Irvin. And that he said Monty Irvin, his dad would carry Monty Irvin's uniform to the ballpark. Because if you took the player's uniform to the ballpark, the player would let you in the game for free. And that it was Monty Irvin that gave his father his first real baseball glove. And that is what inspired a young Roberto Clemente to want to play this game because he wanted to emulate his childhood idol, who was Monty Irvin. And after Roberto dies tragically in that plane accident on a goodwill mission to Nicaragua, as fate would have it, and I think you can only get these stories, Sway, in baseball. As fate would have it, Roberto Clemente and Monty Irvin would both be inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame in the same class. And it's just a beautiful story. And Roberto Clemente was a beautiful man who died trying to help others, but his childhood idol, a Negro League star in Monty Irvin.
There it is. Only Bob Kendrick could give you that, Heather. Like, you have the best podcast voice ever right now.
Ever.
Yeah.
That voice.
I agree.
I'm loving you, Bob. Hey, Bob Kendrick, you can find him on a new podcast called Black Diamonds on Sirius XM. Bob has done so much for the Negro League Baseball Museum. I've been there. It's amazing. I want to open the phone lines. Folks on the line, I want to talk to you, Bob. So give us a call. You have any questions about this, 888-742-3345, and we'll come right back. Yeah, man. Got Bob Kendrick here. Man actually got a basketball scholarship, but he knows more about baseball, seems. You can't ask him nothing about basketball. He got a basketball scholarship.
Ain't that crazy?
Ain't that something?
Wow.
But you've done a lot for the Negro League Baseball Museum. You helped to do fundraising. You've helped turn around millions of dollars to help keep its vitality and financial stability. You've created amazing programming that goes along with it. You created amazing events, including been behind the Legacy Awards. I know you mentioned Buck O'Neil, but he's one of the people that was honored with that. You've done so much, and then just a purveyor of truth in our history in a way. We were just talking about how, certain states are banning certain, race theory being taught in school because of some of the events that have happened that's race-related and people trying to erase history. And that's been the problem, I think, in our country a lot with our people, especially descendants of Africa, is that our stories are never being told incomplete.
Yeah.
No, they're never being told completely, and they're never being told by us. And so you have a really interesting lane on how you could give American history when you're giving the backdrop of what was going on at that time. A lot of folks wouldn't have known that these Negro League players were activists, especially in those times. Could you imagine what would you receive if you stood up and talked about equality and you talked about discrimination? Yeah. Bob Kendrick, can you talk about the activism and which way the activism manifests itself back then for these Negro League players?
And Sway, the interesting thing about it was they were being activists and they didn't even know they were activists because they were so defiant in their stance. Because this story is based on one small, simple principle. You won't let me play with you in the major leagues. Okay, I'll create my own league. And that's an activist stance in its own right. Yeah, so you refuse to accept the notion that you're unfit to do anything. So I'll show you. Again, you won't let me play with you. I create my own. And the interesting juxtaposition here, guys, is here's this league born out of segregation that would ultimately become the driving force for social change in this country. And that prevailing spirit that they had of the mindset that you cannot stop me from playing this game. I'm good at this game. I want everybody to see how good I am at this game, and you are not going to stop me. There's something very American about that spirit. And so while it was America that was trying to prevent them from sharing in the joys of her so-called national pastime, it was the American spirit that allowed them to persevere and prevail. And it was that determination and that pride and that passion and that courage that drove them to play this game against all odds when, quite frankly, y'all, it would have been easy for them to just shut it down. Say, forget this, to hell with this, it's too tough. And they refused to succumb to that notion. And keep in mind, they were riding into towns, filling up ballparks, and yet may not be able to get a meal from the same fans who had just cheered them or not have a place to stay. So they slept on the bus and would eat their peanut butter and crackers until they could get to a place that would offer them basic services. But again, their position, their mindset was, okay, if I've got to sleep on the bus, and if I've got to eat my peanut butter and crackers, I'm going to keep playing ball. Yeah, you cannot stop me from playing this game. And I think that is what drove them. That is what helped elevate this league to a level in which people are not, I think it's one of the greatest stories in the annals of American history,
Yeah.
and you touched upon it, and most people don't even know the story. They don't even know a Negro Leagues existed.
Yeah. Yeah. It's well, we're going to make sure they know now. Bob Kendrick is here, okay? Black Diamond's the name of the podcast. Bob, this is what I want to do. Because you got so many callers.
I believe it.
And you're such an eloquent speaker, man. I wish you read me bedtime stories as a kid. I'll be a lot less stressed as an adult. If you can, citizens, you ask your question, Bob. If you can, give us as precise of an answer as possible. But I will. Okay, but instead of him giving you long, the compounded answers, he'll give you, a preface of the answer, and then you could go to the podcast to hear the rest. Black Diamonds. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to drive them to the podcast. All right,
man, please subscribe.
Yeah, subscribe.
We're having a good time telling these stories.
Black Diamonds on Sirius XM. Corey, you got the first question. You've been waiting the longest. He's from Kansas City. Go for it, Corey.
Hey, Corey.
Hey there. Hey, Mr. Bob Kendrick. This is Corey Smith from KC. How are you, my man?
Corey, I'm good, man. What's up, homie?
Hey, I'm so happy that Sway got to know you. Sway, I'm happy for you that you got to know him.
Thank you.
This guy's a gem. The museum is one of the hidden gems in the whole country. So I appreciate you guys promoting him. And I'm not sure if Bob's ever told the story of how Buck O'Neil got the name Nancy, but it's one of my favorite ones. And I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Bob, but can you please tell the story to Sway's crew of how he got the name Nancy?
We tell that story in one of the most recent episodes of Black Diamonds. It's too long to tell here, but the Cliff Note version is Buck kept his man Satchel Paige out of trouble. Satchel was he liked fast cars, and some might say fast women. And Satchel had gotten himself into a little bit of heat, and Buck was his wingman, and he kept his good friend Satchel out of trouble. It's an amazing classic story that no one can tell better than Buck O'Neil. And we actually have Buck tell the story, and I'm trying to remember now. It was one of the most recent episodes that we do this, and you can hear the story. Oh, we were talking about Satchel, and it's the show on Satchel and barnstorming. And in that show, Buck talks about, Satchel having two women meet at the same place at the same time, and Buck got him out of trouble and got named Nancy as a result of. It is a must-hear story, so please check out the barnstorming episode of Black Diamonds, where we talk about some of Satchel's antics, and you can hear that story in Buck's voice.
Oh, that's awesome. Hey, Corey, thanks for your call, man. You're a citizen, Corey.
Super citizen of Sway in the morning.
Hey, I think just real briefly, can you talk about Buck and Satchel Paige? Because there are folks who are hearing these names that don't know who they are.
Wow.
Oh, man, Buck O'Neil was the founder of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum and a legendary Negro Leaguer in his own right. He was one of my best friends, my mentor, my confidant, outstanding player for the Kansas City Monarchs, would go on to break barriers himself, Sway, in Major League Baseball, becoming the first black coach in Major League Baseball history with the Chicago Cubs in 1962, but really became the voice of the Negro Leagues. When he was introduced to America in Ken Burns' amazing documentary on the history of baseball, where America literally fell in love with this man. He was 82 years old, this very charming, gentle man who was telling these stories to baseball fans they'd never heard before. And, y'all, he did it with a twinkle in his eye and a smile that lit up the screen, and America fell in love with Buck. Satchel, of course, in many respects, was the Negro Leagues. Satchel Paige, in my estimation, is the greatest pitcher of all time. I don't think we will ever, ever, ever see another Leroy Satchel Paige. And when your nickname becomes so iconic that everybody thinks it's your name, you know you must be pretty doggone good. And when I say Leroy Page, nobody really knows who the heck I'm talking about. You say Satchel Paige, you heard that name before. He was believed to be 42 when he gets to the Major Leagues in 1948, and he was still winning, but honestly, he was likely 10 years older than what he claimed to be. No one really knew how old Satchel was. It still remains to this day an age-old mystery regarding what Satchel's age was, but whether he was 42 or 52, he was straight up dealing at the major league level, and it just leads you to wonder what would have happened had the doors opened sooner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, would the Cy Young Award now be the Satchel Paige Award?
Yeah.
You know, these other honors that are bestowed on major leaguers could have very easily been named for Negro League players.
Okay, Bob, listen, I want to take a couple more calls, but this is obvious something we could sit and talk about.
Can you come to Thanksgiving dinner? For real.
Come on, man. Bob, you see what I'm saying? Hey, we got Tone on the line from Jersey. Quick question or a comment, Tone, go for it.
Hey, what's up? Long-time listener, Heather V, Jersey Strong.
Yes.
Jersey Strong.
It's that triple.
All right. I just wanted to speak on my uncle, which is Sidney Blacknall. He played in the Negro League. I'm not sure the year, but he pitched. He tells me stories about him pitching against Hank Aaron, I think Willie Mays or whatever. But yeah, he definitely was in the Negro League. He played in North Carolina League, team, and he ended up going into the military. So that's what curbed him from getting to the next level.
What was his last name?
We saw that happen quite a bit, where guys' careers were actually derailed by military service, and that's a later episode where we'll talk about black baseball and the military. Because you think about this, there were so many players, black baseball players, who fought in various conflicts in this country. And we've been able to trace this way all the way back to the Spanish-American War. And so in these various conflicts, we've been represented as black folks, but even also as black baseball players. And here they were fighting for a country that wasn't fighting for them. And I recall once asking my friend Buck O'Neill, who served in World War II in the Navy, I asked him, I said, Buck, what propelled you guys to want to fight? And his answer was so poignant, succinct, but extremely poignant, because we were American. And there was this constant quest to prove that you were American. And so the patriotism of black folks can never be questioned. Because, again, we were fighting for a country at a time when this country wasn't fighting for us. And so they laid it all on the line, and as positive and upbeat an individual as Buck O'Neill was, perhaps the most positive person I've ever met, he was the consummate glass half full. Where others would see it half empty, he always saw it half full. But the only time that I ever heard him a bit sullen was when he talked about his war experiences, because they came home and the POWs were treated better than they were. They were relegated. The POWs are sitting in the front of the bus, and they're relegated to the back of the bus, having fought for this country in their quest to prove that they were American. And as we know, there's nothing that speaks to that more than service today, where now, and rightfully so, people are revered for their service. That wasn't the way for these black soldiers. And so that is a story, too, that we will bring out in a future episode of Black Diamonds as we look at black baseball and the military.
Black Diamonds. Tone, thank you, Tone. You're a citizen.
Sway in the morning.
It was Blacknall, right? I read up on your uncle.
Yes, sir.
Yes, indeed. Blacknall, HB. That's out. BLACKNALL. Thank you, Tone.
Okay,
you a citizen, Tone.
Sway in the morning.
Man, please, Bob, you're awesome.
For real.
And I love the name of the podcast, so it's amazing.
Black Diamonds. Can you real quick talk about Babe Ruth and some of these famous white baseball players, and how did they receive the Negro League players, and was all of them because the country was in terms of race relations was in a very divided place back then, and still is, as we see. But how were those players? Reception to the Negro League players. Somebody like Babe Ruth.
That's a great question. It really is, because it speaks to what I wholeheartedly believe. Great athletes, Sway, appreciate other great athletes. And Babe Ruth absolutely had great affinity for those black ball players. So much so that it might have cost him an opportunity to manage the New York Yankees. He was too close to him. He had barnstormed with them. He spoke up about them. And I think that rubbed the Yankees organization a little wrong back in the day, and it may have caused Ruth an opportunity to be the manager of the Yankees. And the other superstar major leaguers, it's always been my belief that the superstar major leaguer was never concerned about integration. It was that average major leaguer that was concerned about integration. Because if you allowed this influx of both black and Afro-Latino talent in, I might lose my job. And so they were in a kind of it was self-preservation mode for these players. Yeah, so when Jackie Robinson came up, he took somebody's job. And so that guy now is looking over his shoulder wondering, oh, hell, am I next? And so, but the superstar, the Ted Williams of the world, Ted Williams wasn't worried about integration because Ted Williams could play. And so he had great admiration, and it was Ted Williams who used his own induction speech into the National Baseball Hall of Fame, who used that platform to advocate for other Negro Leaguers to be inducted. He said that he hoped one day the likes of Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson would be inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame as symbols of those great black stars who weren't there because they'd never been given an opportunity. That was 1966. 5 years later, Satchel Paige becomes the first from the Negro Leagues to be inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame. It does not happen if Ted Williams doesn't use that platform to advocate. But it also speaks to the respect that Ted had. He had competed with and against them. He knew that they could play. And then the other sidebar to that was that Ted Williams was of Mexican descent. And a lot of people did not know that.
I didn't know that
but
either.
He also was sensitive to the plight that these black athletes had to endure in this country. But he used that platform very boldly to make that statement, and 5 years later, Satchel is inducted.
Love it, man. Listen, these stories you can hear all day. In fact, you can follow Mr. Bob Kendrick at NLBM Prez, Prez. So, Rich in Philly, Juan in Louisiana, he wanted to thank you for the tour you gave him of the museum. Mill in Denver, Eddie in White Plains, Demi in Charlotte, Randy in Chicago. Hit him up directly on his Instagram. That's NLB National. NLBM Prez, Prez. And then also go to Sirius XM and hear the Black Diamonds podcast. Bob Kendrick, can't wait to see you again.
Hey, Sway, man, looking forward to it. Got to get you out here to KC.
Come on, man. Well, we talked about doing the live broadcast, a morning show broadcast.
We got to do it.
Okay.
We've got to do it.
Okay, COVID stopped us, but now we're back. We're going to make that happen, brother. I appreciate you. Congratulations on all the success. Bob Kendrick, ladies and gentlemen.
Bob.
All right, my man Bob. Take care, Bob. Thank you.
All right, guys. Much love. Thank you.
Thank you, man.